I'm Paul Howes, Vice President of the Guild, and I don't know if you've ever seen Hugh Edwards' documentary on the Welsh in Argentina, but it was following that, or my wife's memory of that when we were in Buenos Aires last year, she insisted that we take a 2-hour flight south from Buenos Aires to a place called Trelew. And Trelew is in the province of Chubut, towards the south of Argentina. And we stayed in a Welsh guest house, or a Welsh-speaking guest house. The landlady had perfect Cardiganshire Welsh. She'd done a PhD at the University of Lampeter in Welsh. And just a little anecdote, I went down first thing in the morning to check on the car, and some gentleman walked past and said, "Bore da." So I know enough Welsh to give him a bore da back, but that's about the limits. It's my pleasure to introduce Professor Wyn James from the University of Cardiff. He's been lucky enough to visit Chubut 5 or 6 times, I believe, so he's got a lot to tell us. Professor James is a professor of Welsh literature and culture at the University of Cardiff, so please give him a warm welcome.
You hear me now? Good. Well, it's a small world, isn't it? Because we probably stayed in the same guest house in Trelew. And I know the owner of that guest house quite well, as has been said already. I've had the privilege of going back and forth to the Gaiman and Trelew area a number of times over the years, and it's a very interesting, a very strange, a very surreal experience, really. I remember landing there the first time, flying down from Buenos Aires, and landing down in the airport there. And you were suddenly faced with landing in a very, very flat, dry, brown area, so different from Wales. Fair play to some of the local leaders of the Welsh local Welsh Society had come to meet us, and it was quite bizarre and strange to go out to the airport into the lounge area and being addressed by people in Welsh in this very strange, totally different location, you know. But anyway, I want to, in the time that we have, I want to take you on this journey to Patagonia, to Argentina then, and in particular to the province of Chubut. And we're talking about a place which is 700 miles south. This is the Chubut area. That Talaith means province in Welsh there. This is the province of Chubut here. And we're talking about the main Welsh settlement is in this area, the lower Chubut Valley. The Welsh name for the river that runs through that area is the Camwy, or the Chapat River, or Chubut River, but the Welsh called it the Camwy. Cam means bending, twisting, and Wy refers to the water, so winding water, if you like, is the Welsh name that was given to that river. And there's a smaller, I'll mention that again later on, all being well, there's a smaller Welsh settlement here up in the Andes. Very different situation there, much nearer to Wales. It's mountainous and green. And quite a lively, much smaller Welsh settlement there, but very lively culturally as well there. But anyway, as I say, the journey here on this ship, this Mimosa, a converted tea clipper, the journey we have starts in May of 1865, when just over 150 Welsh people boarded the Mimosa to take them. As I say, the settlement is 700 miles more or less south of Buenos Aires. They had to travel 10,000 miles and it took them 2 months. They left in May 1865, and they arrived in well, what is called the New Bay here in this area here in July of well, they actually landed on the 28th of July, which is still celebrated in the Welsh community, and indeed throughout Newport by now. So it's a public holiday in Newport. The 28th of July, the landing, the day of the landing, Gwyl y Glaniad. Because although, as again, you must remember, I think, although we are talking about people that are Welsh speaking of the 5th and 6th generation in this area, they're very much by now a minority. You have perhaps as many, perhaps as 5,000 people who have some knowledge of Welsh, not all of them perhaps fluent, but ardent learners of Welsh, out of a population of Newport of about 500,000. So it's a very small group, but a very ardent group still, as we'll see hopefully before the end of what I have to say. So as I say, they made their way down to well, to this area here. They landed on this area here, near where, and they called the town that developed there eventually, or they called this Porth Madryn, or Puerto Madryn, as it's usually referred to now, or just as Madryn. Any of you familiar with the Llŷn Peninsula of North Wales will know that Madryn is a place on the Llŷn Peninsula. And it was given that name because one of the people that went down there prior to the main party leaving in May of 1865 from Liverpool, one or two people had gone down prior to that to see the lie of the land, if you like, and one of them was a man called Squire Love Parry from Madryn, and yes, you. You know Madryn, obviously. I know the family. You know the family as well, the Love Parry family. Yes. Well, the Love Parry, as I say, he didn't actually move to there. He just went and helped on an exploratory journey there. And they called it Madryn then to recognise the fact that he was a squire of Madryn in North Wales. And of course there are a number, as you can see. The Welsh, when they developed the area, gave Welsh names to many of the places. Trelew is one of the main towns in the area, or cities in the area. Tre means the tre in Welsh means it can mean a farm or a homestead, or it can mean a town. And the lew in Trelew is a man called Lewis Jones, who was one of the main leaders of and indeed he was one of the ones that went to reconnoitre the land with Love Jones Parry, and they named, when he was instrumental in developing a railway which reached from Porth Madryn over to this is the Newport Valley itself. But the entrance to the river Newport there isn't as good in terms of vessels, so they had to land in this area and go overland to the valley itself. And you can see some of the names: Dol, Avon. Avon in Welsh is river. Dol is a meadow. And then up in the Andes, then you've got Tre Felyn. Tre again means the town of the homestead, and Melyn there means sorry? A mill. Oh, thank you. So and some of these names are still used in their Welsh form: Trelew, Dolavon, Trevelyan. Others, like Dolaplee here, the meadow of the feathers, has been it is now used mainly in its Spanish form. That is, their names being translated from Welsh into Spanish, and as most of the population there are non-Welsh speaking, that means that you'll hear more of the Spanish versions of the names if you go to that area. And I would very much suggest you do go to the area. One of the things, certainly going to the Welsh community there, is they're very, very welcoming, extremely welcoming. I'm sure you experienced that yourself when you were there. Anyway, the question, of course, is why did these people, these 153 or 60, there's a certain amount of uncertainty exactly how many, but why did they go 7,000 miles over a 2-month period to this place? And the reason really we got to go to North America to start answering that question. Now, there'd been a steady stream of Welsh immigration to North America, to the USA, then in the first half of the 19th century. The Welsh mainly went to Ohio and Pennsylvania and Upper New York State. Later on, Wisconsin also develops as an important area for Welsh immigration, but in the period we're talking about now, it's Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New York State. Initially, the Welsh were going there for agricultural employment, but of course, as time went on, and with the industrial developments in Wales, and then subsequent industrial developments in America, there are more and more people leaving the industrial valleys of South Wales to go to America and the industrial areas of North Wales, for that matter, and the slate quarrying areas and so forth. And there were, by about 1850, they was estimated that there were about 50,000 people born in Wales living in the States. Now, people emigrate for all sorts of reasons. Ultimately, it's all a matter of searching for a better life, isn't it? Most of people, economic reasons are the main, often the central reasons for emigration. But there are other considerations as well, linked to the desire to escape oppression and also to gain freedom. And these are all very topical matters, of course, aren't they, in our day? But you had people who were going, yes, for economic reasons, but also for political freedom or religious freedom or for personal freedoms. And the person we got to mention here is this man. You can see him in his a man called Michael D. Jones. He was born in 1822. And died in 1898, so he lived for most of the 19th century. And he's often called the father of the Welsh settlement in Patagonia, although he actually never went there himself to live. His son is dead, but he didn't do himself. He was a man with very strong convictions of all sorts, religious and political. He was a nonconformist in his religion, a Welsh Congregationalist in his religion, and politically he was a liberal, which was representing of the radical political movement of the time, and a strong Welsh patriot. And as I say, he was a very strong character, and one reason why he didn't go to Patagonia is he wanted to stay and fight back in Wales for promoting the Welsh language and culture and religion. So he's a strong character, and I put him on a collision course with the establishment in Wales. That is, with the upper classes in Wales, the landowner classes, if you like. You've got to remember, in this period, most of or a high percentage of the upper class in Wales they were Anglican in religion. They were conservative in their politics, and they were English in their language and culture, and often people who were born in England and moving into Wales. Now, I'm generalizing there, obviously, but that was the tendency in that period. And that got contrasted dramatically, really, with the bulk of the common people of Wales, who at the time were Welsh-speaking in the main, and were increasingly nonconformist in terms of religion. That is, turning their back on the Anglican Church. and also liberal and radical in their politics, increasingly so as the 19th century progresses. And you can see that the clashes then and tensions are inevitable, to put it mildly. And one sees this in the case of Michael D. Jones himself. His widowed mother, for example, was turned out of her home by her landlord because Michael D. Jones had supported the Liberal Party in the election of 1859, and that becomes a symbolic event. And his mother didn't live long after that eviction as well. And so you can see that Wales becomes an increasingly turbulent country in the 19th century. A lot of tensions of all sorts in the situation in Wales in the mid 19th century especially, and the Patagonian settlement is part of that turbulence. Now, Michael D. Jones was raised in the Bala area of North Wales. We're talking about Madryn. Madryn is in this area here, but he was born and brought up in the Bala area of the middle of North Wales. Although his father actually came from your wife's area in Cardiganshire, but he moved to Bala to become a minister, congregation minister, and a principal of a theological college. And that's what Michael D. Jones himself, he followed his father in Bala as a minister and as a college principal. But in 1848, he'd finished his training as a minister, as a pastor then, and for the Christian ministry. But he went to America for a year, mainly to Ohio, mainly to Cincinnati, when a number of his extended family had emigrated to Ohio, including his sister. And what he saw there was that when the Welsh were emigrating to the States, he saw that they were assimilating very quickly into the wider community around them, an English-speaking community mainly, of course. Not only English, there were Germans in Cincinnati, etc., but the dominant language was English. And so the Welsh were becoming anglicized, if you like, and losing their language, losing their culture, losing their traditions and customs, and very importantly as well, to Michael D. Jones, losing their nonconformist Christianity, Welsh nonconformist Christianity. And he started to campaign. You can see that's summarizing, in a sense, some of the things I've already mentioned to you about the tensions with the Anglican Church and the landowners, etc. And Michael D. Jones started campaigning at that point that what ought to happen. He accepted that emigration was inevitable. He didn't like people emigrating. As I said, he stayed in Wales himself to fight his patch in Wales. But because people were emigrating, it was something, a feature of humanity, he said, was for people to emigrate. What he wanted to happen was that the Welsh would go together to the same place. Instead of going to all parts of North America, for example, that they would go to the same place together, so that they could be the top dog, if you like, in that place, the formative influence in that place. And he says, by doing that, instead of us assimilating into a different cultural community, we can create a new Wales overseas. So that is the sort of vision that he starts campaigning for in the 1840s. And this idea did gain increasing momentum by the 1860s. And by the 1860s, there's just a quote there about one of this chap here, Pritchard Williams, was one of the people on the Mimosa, going on that first group that went to Patagonia. And as you can see, someone writing about him there talks about these talented young Welshmen of the time dreaming for a new Welsh Atlantis, a new Welsh utopia, if you like, overseas. And as I say, Michael D. Jones becomes the leader, really, of this movement. He's drawn in to be the leader of this movement, to set up a settlement of this nature. And a number of places were considered as possibilities. Vancouver Island, for example, was one of the places that was considered at the time because it was far enough away from other influences in North America. They considered Palestine and Syria. I don't know what would have happened to the Welsh community in Syria and Palestine by now, but they considered a number of options, but eventually they settled on the Chubut Valley initially, but with the idea of the whole of Patagonia ultimately becoming a Welsh province of Argentina. And the reason for that was because it was a remote area, far away from English influences, but also far away from most influences within Argentina itself, because Argentina was only developing in that period. And that area that we've looked at the map already, the Chubut Valley, there were no European settlements there. There were nomadic indigenous peoples, but they didn't have settlements, if you like. They were nomadic peoples. So the Welsh saw it as an area that they could move into and be far enough away from everyone else to develop as a new Wales overseas, if you like. And you can see the optimism, the vision, this vision for a new Wales, a new Welsh utopia, a new Welsh Atlantis overseas that had gripped some of these people. As I say, this chap, Pritchard Williams, he was actually at the time of going to Patagonia, he was a grocer in Birkenhead in Liverpool, but of part of the Welsh community in the Liverpool area and the Merseyside area there. And you can see the same sort of optimism in a song that was being sung by the Welsh on board the Mimosa as they embarked to go to Patagonia in May of 1865. Prior to, they'd all gone on board ship and raised the Red Dragon, the Welsh flag. And when they were doing this, there was booing coming from the shore. The English on the shore were booing this expression of Welsh identity, if you like. But then they started hearing them singing, and singing what they thought was God Save the Queen. And immediately the boos changed to cheers. What they didn't realize is what they were doing was actually singing a Welsh patriotic song to the tune of God Save the Queen. And as you can see from the translation there, we found a better land in the far south, it's Patagonia. Ni gawsom wlad sydd well yn y deheudir pell a Patagonia yw, and that they'd be able to live in peace there without fear of betrayal or the sort, and ruled by a Welshman, not by Queen Victoria, although they did claim that Queen Victoria was of Welsh descent. So they were fairly supportive of Queen Victoria, as it happens, but they were looking now for somewhere where a Welshman would be ruling them. Praise be to God. Boed mawr I Dduw. So as I say, you can see the Welsh patriotism and the Welsh optimism there that is in that song. This expression, if you like, of the Patagonian dream, this Patagonian ideal of a new Wales overseas. But unfortunately, rather than a better land flowing with milk and honey, they found themselves arriving in their destination on a barren, windswept beach. There's a colleague of mine in Cardiff, Dr. Bill Jones, and Professor Bill Jones there. I was standing by the side of him, I think, when he took that picture, but you can see the area they landed. That is now Puerto Madryn, or Porth Madryn, which wasn't there, of course, at the time. It was just a windswept, barren area. And because there'd been delays in them leaving Liverpool, they actually arrived there in the middle of the Patagonian winter, because July, of course, is the middle of winter in the southern hemisphere. And what faced them then was a long 40-mile track across the steppe. Here you can see part of the steppe there, to reach their new home in the Chubut Valley. So not exactly the most welcoming of ways of reaching Patagonia. The steppes, and if they'd read or they talked to Charles Darwin about it, Charles Darwin said about that area in 1833, is this plain has a very sterile appearance and will forever remain nearly useless to mankind. And they'd been rather misled, I'm afraid, by Lewis Jones and Love Jones Parry about how fertile the land was, because when they arrived at the Chubut Valley, rather than being a fertile valley, the reality was very, very different. And you can see that expressed in another song written 2 years later. I won't read it all now to you, but you can see the translation there yourself. But this is a very bitter song, written, as I say, in 1867, to the tune of what would become ultimately the Welsh national anthem, The Land of My Fathers. It was becoming popular as a popular Welsh patriotic song in this period. It hadn't actually been formally adopted as the Welsh national anthem at the time, but as some of you will know, I'm sure, the refrain says, you know, Gwlad, Gwlad, my land, you know, I'm faithful to my land, sort of thing, you know. This is saying, this land, he says, is unproductive. It's sterile and bare everywhere from the north to the south to the east. And he talks about the trying to grow and sowing the seeds to no avail. The destructive, poisonous dryness and the wind causes them to wither. And so really, basically, he's saying in writing, you know, in composing this song on the tune of, you know, Wales, Wales, you know, my land of Wales, you know, he's basically saying, I want to go back there. And it's not surprising to learn that he did go back almost immediately after writing this song, as did a number of other people in that early group that went out. But what happens then is that they did have help in this early period. The Argentinian government were very keen for a European settlement there, to develop there, so that they could claim that area as part of Argentina or part of under the authority of Buenos Aires, because it was a disputed area between Argentina and Chile. So they were very anxious for the Welsh to be there, and they gave them some supplies in this early period especially. They also paid the indigenous peoples of the area to help the Welsh by teaching them to hunt and to manage the terrain, etc. And you can see here an early picture there. The Lewis Jones, the man that Trelew is named after, here with some of the indigenous inhabitants. And generally speaking, the Welsh and the indigenous peoples got on quite well together. There was no major tensions between them. Indeed, when the Argentine government starts basically what you can call a genocide of the indigenous peoples in what was called the conquest of the desert by the 1880s, the Welsh are sending letters. The indigenous peoples are asking the Welsh to plead on their behalf, and the Welsh are writing. Lewis Jones is writing to Buenos Aires to tell the authorities not to treat the indigenous peoples as harshly as they were. But of course, the Welsh didn't have any political or military influence to stop what was going on. But as I say, in general terms, the Welsh and the indigenous peoples got on very, very well, quite well. Now, just to give you some idea of the terrain we're talking about, the Newport Valley itself, the lower Newport Valley then, is about 40 miles long and about 4 miles wide. You can see there, quite interestingly, you've got the Argentinian and the Welsh flags together there on your side by side. You can see the sort of flat terrain you've got there. And then what you have then on either side of the flat bottom of the valley itself, you've got these hills on either side. And just to give you some idea, this is a map which is actually the crosses on the map show the Welsh chapels, because what the Welsh did, they set up chapels throughout the I think there were about 15, 16 of them altogether at the height of the building of the chapels by the 1890s, and they are spread throughout. The dotted line is the mountains or the hills on both sides of the valley. So that's the extent of the lower valley itself. And then the crosses show and the dates show the different chapels, and the chapels became centres not just of religious life, but of community life generally. And indeed, all the areas, if you like, they were the different areas are named after the different chapels. So you go to the Treorchy area, for example, or Gaiman and Bryncron, etc., and Dolafon. So they are important centres of local community life generally in the valley. But you can see the black line there in the centre there is the river Newport, and you can see why the Welsh called it a sort of a winding water, if you like, by its very nature. But it means that most of the valley is quite away from the river itself, as you can see. The banks of the river are quite high, and the water doesn't generally overflow onto the land, even when the river rises in spring, which of course is our autumn. But when the snows melt in the Andes and come down, the river rises significantly, but it doesn't rise over its banks usually. Although there are periods of dramatic floods as well over the years. There was especially a bad flood in 1896, I think, which carried away most of the buildings the Welsh had built. They had to go up to the hillsides to shelter from this. You know, the valley had been turned into just a huge lake, really. So they do have these, or they did have these dramatic floods at times. There are a dam further up in the river now helps to regulate that. But they did have these floods at times. But generally, the land is rather dry and dusty, to put it mildly, and windy, as I said as well. Now, the Welsh arrived too late in 1865 to plant. Because they were later arriving than they'd intended because of various complications. And then in 1866, I mean, they had some provisions from the Argentinian government to keep them going, if you like. In 1866, then they tried to planting vegetables and wheat near the bends in the river. But although the wheat started to grow, it withered in the wind and in the dry weather, and the wind is a feature of the Newport Valley. If you go there, you don't need an umbrella, mainly because there's not an awful lot of rain anyway. But if it does rain, the wind will blow your umbrella inside out. So don't bother to pack an umbrella if you're going to Patagonia. But in desperation now, really, at the failure of the harvest, they decided to leave. The whole community decided up sticks, if you like, and trekked the 40 miles back over the steppes to the sea to Port Madryn, taking their belongings with them. But 2/3 of them were persuaded to go back to the valley for one last attempt, with the promise of provisions, again further provisions by the Argentine government until the harvest succeeded. And they tried to plant again in 1867, but the prospects didn't look good, and the wheat had begun to germinate, but it was withering by the November of 1867. I say because of the lack of rain and because of the heat. But then we have a remarkable accidental turn of events. Now, one of the settlers, a man called Aaron Jenkins, he'd agreed to remain for this last attempt. He's someone that had bought into the Patagonian dream, if you like, of a new Wales overseas. The people that went, a lot of the leaders had bought into that dream, but there were other people that were just going for economic reasons, and as I say, a lot of them just went in desperation. But Aaron Jenkins agreed to stay on because he'd bought into this Patagonian dream of a free Welsh-speaking, radical, nonconformist Wales overseas. But he was rather half-hearted, to put it mildly, about his efforts to plant and grow the seed, the wheat at the time. And rather than struggling, you can see a description here of it, of what happened. Rather than struggling to dig the land near the river, like the other settlers were doing, and there were only 1 or 2 ploughs available anyway, so a lot of the digging would have to be in, very hard work by hand. So what he did was he just sort of scattered the seed over the land rather than digging it in as the others were doing, with and much less effort, sort of thing. And including sowing some of the seed on the sort of the barren black soil, as it was being described, which is away from the river. And everyone had taken it that this black soil was infertile. There was no water reaching it easily. Well, the wheat had begun to grow, as I say, and it had begun to wither again. And one Sunday, Aaron Jenkins was looking over the wheat field and seeing the crop wither. And he could also see the river nearby, which was quite swollen with the waters coming down from, the spring waters coming down from the Andes. And realizing that the land was actually below, as I said earlier on, the banks of the river were quite high. And he realized that the land, of course, was lower than the banks of the river, and the river risen high. And when he was looking, his wife said, well, why don't you cut a channel so that the water would run from the high point of the river, if you like, through this channel onto the field? And he does that. He cuts this narrow channel from the swollen river and lets the water flow over the field, over the parched land, including this black soil. And after being stoked thoroughly, then he closes the ditch, and in a few days the wheat begins to grow and thrive. And after some weeks, then he does the same thing again, lets the water go in through a channel, and the result is that the wheat grows and ripens and is very plentiful and of excellent quality. And what it had shown as well was that the black soil, rather than being infertile, was quite the opposite when it was watered. It was extremely fertile land. And of course, what happens then? As you can imagine, all the other settlers follow the example. And the result is an abundant harvest. And one article bears the title, Aaron Jenkins, the man who saved the Welsh colony. Because of this, but technically it would be truer to say Rachel Jenkins, his wife, saved the Welsh colony. And the result was that the Welsh, as a result of that, the Welsh created a network of canals and a very sophisticated irrigation channel. You can see one of the canals there, all done by very hard work. They didn't have the sort of what's the word I want? Excavators, etc. That, you know, and mechanical equipment that we have these days. It was all done by very hard graft. And the irrigation system, about the middle of the 20th century, the Argentina, the Newport government asked some experts from Israel to come and look at the system. And they said that they couldn't improve on it. It was such an advanced system for its day. And we're talking about the 1870s now, aren't we, really? You know, 1860s through to the 1880s, when this irrigation system develops. And the result was that the Welsh, therefore, through this, turned the valley into a very, very fertile place. Time is going on, is it? 15 minutes, right? It went into a very fertile place. So much so that by 1889, grain from the Newport Valley was winning international prizes for the excellence of the grain in places like Chicago and Paris. So a remarkable turnaround, and you know, a huge change, therefore, in the situation. Now, I was going to, I think I'll actually skip what I was going to say about R.O. Jenkins. I just mentioned one or two things because I think it does show the hardships, the early hardships, you know, in a very personalized way. One of the problems with the early settlement was that although there were people coming there, the early settlers, this 150 or so people that went, they were quite varied group, a quite motley group in many ways. Some from most parts of Wales, quite a lot from Liverpool, the Liverpool Welsh then. But a high percentage of them were people, about 40% of them were from the South Wales valleys here, the industrial valleys. And of course they weren't particularly qualified to be farmers. Although some of them had moved, their families had perhaps moved into the South Wales industrial valleys from agricultural areas like Cardiganshire. They themselves were skilled people in industry. So they weren't particularly skilled for agricultural work. And Aaron Jenkins was a case in point. He was actually born in the Vale of Glamorgan, so he was born in an agricultural area, but the family moved quite soon up into the valleys, and he was a miner himself, an iron miner, an iron worker in the Merthyr Valley, in the Taff Valley. The Jenkins, incidentally, is quite possibly related to a Richard Jenkins, from the Port Talbot area, who is better known to you as Richard Burton, the actor. So this far removed in the family, but probably the same Jenkins in our case. The other thing to say, I think, about the people that went out, they're often referred to as, by subsequent generations, as the old settlers. But actually most of them were young people. Young families. There were about 30 of them, I think, were children under the age of 10. So you know, it's Rachel and Aaron Jenkins were in that category, a young married family with they had 2 small boys by the time they moved, and you can see the hardships now that they suffered after embarking on the Mimosa. Their little son James, who was 2.5 years of age, he died early on in the voyage. Rachel was heavily pregnant at the time, and a daughter was born, and she was called Rachel after her mother. She was born on board ship, but she died 3 months later, just after arriving in the settlement, in the new land sort of thing. They had another daughter then, Arianwen, in April of 1868, and she died the following month. And then 2 months later, the mother, Rachel, died. leaving Aaron Jenkins to raise his only remaining child, Richard, who was age 7 at the time. He remarries, and he and his second wife, his subsequent wife, Margaret, they have 6 children together. But he is killed himself by a bandit. There was not a police force at the time, but in the valley, so the different people were acting as policemen, and a Chilean bandit had escaped, and he was escorting him to the jail when he was killed by the bandit himself, leaving his wife, his pregnant wife, with 5 children and the son from the earlier marriage to raise. You can see the hardships that these people were facing in this early period. Just one example of that to you. Ultimately, Richard, the eldest son, goes up to I think I've got a picture here somewhere. Yes, he goes up to the Andes, to the settlement in the Andes, one of the ones that develops a settlement in the Andes. This is the Welsh chapel in Trevelyan in the Andes. It's a very different place to the dry valley in the south, and the mountains behind there. The mountain there is called in Welsh Gorsedd y Cwmwl. Gorsedd means throne, and Cwmwl means cloud. So the throne of the clouds come down on a very poetic name for the mountain, Gorsedd y Cwmwl, but a very striking and lovely area there. Well, anyway, you've got 5-10 more minutes. 5 more minutes, right? Yes. I want to give people an opportunity to yeah. Right. Well, to cut a very long story short, what happens really is that the success of the irrigation, etc., opening the economic success now, is the seed of the failure of the Patagonian dream. Because what happens is that by the 1890s, people from other parts of Argentina now are flocking into the area because of the economic success. And by the time of the First World War, 2/3 of the population of the Chubut Valley are now non-Welsh extraction. Emigration from Wales ceases really with the First World War as well, to all intents and purposes. The Argentinian government starts from about the 1890s on taking a very strong line on assimilation. They don't want the Welsh to remain as a separate cultural, economic unit. So whereas up until the 1890s, there's a sort of golden period where the Welsh people run the whole of the activities, to all intents and purposes, locally in the Chubut Valley, and everything is run through the medium of Welsh. Local government, education, the chapels, of course, all things you can think of really are through the medium of Welsh. The government, the Argentine government, comes in quite strongly then and changes the language of the primary schools, for example, from Welsh to Spanish. And increasingly, this emphasis on assimilation increases more and more as the 20th century develops, and which means that things were looking very dire for the Welsh language in the interwar years especially, and people were sort of saying, well, Welsh is going to die out. But there's been a remarkable resurrection, if you like, and revitalizing of Welsh culture in the area since the Second World War, for a number of reasons. Firstly, Chubut became a province in its own right in the 1950s, and they wanted to establish their own identity as separate from other provinces in Argentina. And what made them different was the Welsh. So they started saying, oh, the Welsh were exceptional pioneers, and really putting them on a pedestal. together, ironically, with the indigenous peoples, because they started saying, well, the indigenous peoples were a very important part of this part of Argentina, despite the terrible treatment they'd received in earlier generations. It was also the 100th anniversary of the settlement in 1965. And that brought new relationships back with people in Wales. People in Wales sort of suddenly woke up to the fact that it's still there. There are still people speaking Welsh in Newport, and of course, better communications mean that people are back and forth much more than they were able to in earlier periods, and that has increased. And from about the 1990s, especially, there's been a real resurgence of interest in the Welsh language. There's a very powerful Welsh learning movement there. So that and in the past sort of 10-15 years, there are 3 elementary schools being established, which are Welsh and Spanish bilingual schools. The first time that Welsh has been taught as an official language, if you like, in that area in over 100 years. And the Welsh took with them, of course, their cultural heritage back from Wales. They took their chapels. The chapels were becoming more and more Spanish speaking. But by now, there's a resurrection. There's more Welsh in the chapels than there would have been sort of 30, 40 years ago. Welsh hymn singing is very popular out there. The Eisteddfod, as you will be aware of the Eisteddfod, this Welsh competitive event, if I can. Yeah, there we are. Some of you will be aware of the ceremonial in the Eisteddfod, where you get the cheering of the bard and the people wearing sort of long flowing druidic robes. You get that in Patagonia, but instead of druidic robes, you get ponchos. Right? So you get an adaptation of Welsh. It's Argentinian Welsh culture, not Welsh culture. And where you get flower dancing, like you got there, back in Wales as well, you also get a performance of the tango in the Welsh Eisteddfod in Patagonia. So these adaptations of it, and that's an important thing to remember. The Welsh of Patagonia are not Welsh. They're Argentinians who are proud of their Welsh heritage. And this fairly small group, descendants of the people who had this Patagonian dream, they accept that was a dream. It wasn't going to be a reality. But they still want to preserve the Welsh culture as part of the mosaic, if you like, of the culture of Chubut and of Patagonia generally. Well, I'd better stop at that point, I think.
No, you're fine.
Okay.
Yep. All right, well, please put your hands together for a very interesting presentation. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, right in the back there. Yeah, you knew it, didn't you? While she's going down there, could I ask one myself?
Yeah.
There are several nations in the world that are passionate about rugby, but
Yeah.
very few of them as passionate as the Welsh and the Argentines, Las Pumas. Has there been any influence of the Welsh on that Argentine passion?
I'm not sure, actually. I think it quite possibly is. But it's actually a good case in point, you see, because, as I say, the people, the Welsh speakers in Patagonia generally are not Welsh. They're Argentinians of Welsh descent. And I remember going on a visit there. There was major celebrations in 2015. Of the 150th anniversary of the settlement, and I went out there for those celebrations, and there was a group of people in a bus from Wales who had come over, and they went to one of the bilingual schools in Trelew, Welsh and Spanish speaking. They were able to speak to all the children in Welsh, right, in that school. although a lot of them were coming from homes that weren't Welsh speaking, but they'd chosen to send their children to a Welsh medium education. And this person asked them, "Oh, who do you support in rugby? And the Pumas, Argentina, or Wales?" And I knew what was going to come, but she didn't. She was expecting them to say, because they was Welsh speaking, so that they support Welsh. Oh no, Argentina we support. We're Argentinians. And that is a very important thing, I think, in terms of a lesson for emigration generally. People think you move to another country and you and your descendants are going to still be the same people. No, a new country claims its own. And that is very true of the Welsh in Argentina. People think going there, I try to forewarn people who go there, don't go there and think that you're going to meet Welsh people. You're going to meet people who are passionate about Welsh and about Welsh things, but they are members of a different community. Their culture, their society, their geography is so different, and all cultures developed. I mean, that is going to be true. I think what has happened, whereas in the 1960s people were saying, oh, the Welsh language is going to die, and the Welsh culture is going to die here. There's no future for it. I remember people telling me that at the time. What you can see now is that there's very much a future for Welsh culture. But that will be different. It'll be Argentinian Welsh culture, and that Argentinian Welsh culture will be different perhaps in 20, 30 years to what it is now, because any living culture develops and changes.
Thank you. Please go ahead, Nicole.
I always thought that the early settlers took sheep with them, didn't they?
Took sheep them?
Sheep.
Yeah, well, they didn't, if I remember correctly, they didn't take many animals on board the ship itself, but they were arrangements for them to have cattle and sheep via the Argentinian government. They were driven down there from other parts of Argentina. But yes, I mean they were animals, you know, because they were some of the cows were rather wild and they had to have the help of some of the indigenous peoples to try and know how to tackle these cows, you know, and tame them.
Okay, next question.
Has the Welsh language evolved in Patagonia from the Old Welsh to
yes,
modern
yes,
Welsh?
yes. There are because of the lack of contact over a long period, you know, the language of the Welsh language of Patagonia develops to a certain extent different from. It's understandable. I mean, you can understand it. It's just like a different Welsh dialect. Interesting, what has happened in the past, well, since the 1990s, there's been a system whereby the Welsh government and others support teachers going out from Wales to teach the Welsh learner movement. And of course, they're going out teaching modern Wales Welsh. So that actually unfortunately really, some of the Patagonian distinctives in their dialect are not as prominent now as they would have been 50 years ago. But yes, I mean, there are influences, from an older form of Welsh, which has changed in Wales itself, but has continued, you know, in vocabulary, you know, different vocabulary nowadays to what it would have been 100 years ago. Also, there are Spanish influences on the Welsh of Patagonia, which whether there are English influences on the Welsh of Wales. So yes, so there are differences, but they're becoming less, as is true of most languages worldwide because of, you know, the media, etc. You know.
The situation is different with Canada, where the Canadian French is an old-fashioned French and is looked down upon by the Parisian French.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. Yes, but you know, I had again a rather unfortunate experience of being with a Welsh teacher and you know, from Wales there, and she came out of a class and said, "Oh, I had to correct that what he said," said, well, no, that is the natural way they would say it in Patagonia, you know. But, yeah.
Any last questions? All right, well, we're all done. Thank you so much, Professor James. We really enjoyed it. Just one additional thing, if you do have any additional questions, Professor James is staying for lunch, so he's very willing to answer questions.